All right, I am George Schlacek.
The one and only.
It was Saturday, May 20th, 2017. I had arrived in Tofino by bus the previous day, assembled my bike, bought groceries, and then stayed at an oceanfront campground. Everything felt surreal. I was up early because I wanted to get a head start before traffic would pick up on the Pacific Rim Highway. The first day started out foggy, on a bike trail leading to Pacific Rim Park, following the highway, and it made it feel quite safe. The fog gradually disappeared, and before long I was at a beach in that park. There were dozens of cars already parked, and some looked like they might have been there all night, despite the signs forbidding overnight parking. Most of the people were surfers. I could not help but wonder about the water temperature this early in the season, so I stopped for a bit and walked down to the water. Indeed, it was a bit on the chilly side, but not as cold as one might expect. The surfers all had wetsuits, which probably made the plunge into the ocean quite pleasant. The ride continued through the park, and there were some truly old parts of forest with gigantic trees along the way. I made another stop to record myself, riding along this stretch of road using a miniature tripod. As I was doing that, I spotted two cyclists with loaded touring bikes that had appeared behind me, going in the same direction. Curious as I was, I let them catch up. This was the first time I met Marion and Tom, a French couple who were also starting a trip across Canada. Their final destination was Montreal, the city they had called home for a couple of years. The tour was going to be their farewell to Canada as they were moving back to France later that summer. On this day, they were headed for Akyurt, from where they would catch a bus to Nanaimo. People had advised them against riding their bike across the island on Highway 4. Especially that dangerous section I was concerned about as well. My resolve to ride the entire way was too strong to change my mind. But I have to admit that I was nervous. I had wanted to buy a high visibility vest, but had not seen any in Tofino. Actually, I was still wearing the same khaki shirt I had been wearing during my flight to Vancouver. It would make me blend in with the vegetation at best. I stopped again at the turnoff toward Port Alberni. The highway makes a left turn here, while the way to Akyurt is straight ahead. I was hungry and hadn't even had my morning coffee yet, so I took advantage of the picnic table outside the Waya Welcome Center, bought a coffee at the store, and made sandwiches for breakfast. The sun was up in full force now, and it was getting hot already. The most critical parts of the highway lay just ahead, along Kennedy Lake and beyond. I hardly had an early morning edge over the holiday traffic now, but had been told that most of the traffic would be headed toward the Pacific coast for the holiday weekend, not the way I was going. It wasn't the most reassuring thought, but the road was gradually going to improve as I'd make my way east. The idea of spending more time at the Pacific and enjoy the ocean for a day or two crossed my mind. But I was at the beginning of the longest bike tour I had ever attempted and didn't want to delay it even by an extra day. It was going to take months, best case scenario. The weather was good now, but it could change any time. Besides, Akyurt was another tourist hotspot on a long weekend, overpriced and overcrowded. The ride that followed was pretty tough. Some of the hairpin curves were so tight that I had to time the arrival of cars going my way, so I wouldn't be in their way after a sharp curve crawling up a hill at 6 kilometers an hour. I actually stopped at the side of the road to listen for upcoming vehicles. If I could hear them, I knew they were too close, so I waited until they passed. I was not going to risk getting hit by an inattentive driver in a hairpin curve with limited visibility. Of course, this slowed me down overall.
Well, I made a good part of the way, but need a little break here. And I can hear the cars coming, so I'll just time it. But yeah, it's not much space here. It's kind of scary.
The good thing was that the steep inclines were short and followed by equally steep descents, which catapulted me through some of the narrow sections at very high speed. The most critical section was actually clearly marked with warning signs, but on a long weekend in Canada there's always a very real chance of encountering careless drivers.
The problem is not really the road, it's the drivers. Traffic, thank goodness, not heavy, but they're not obeying the speed limits. They're going like way over. Anyways, wish me luck.
While navigating some of the most dangerous parts of roadway, I was quite stunned by the beauty of the landscape. There really is no better way to enjoy this than by riding a bicycle, especially when there are no cars, and all you hear is the sound of your tires. Highway 4 between the Pacific Coast and Port Alberni would need substantial upgrades to make it truly safe. But as I've seen too many times in other areas, upgrades that are aimed at safety for cars often miss the target and achieve the opposite, while actually destroying the landscape. Cars would just drive faster and traffic volume would increase. Perhaps it's time to build a bike trail separated from the road. It would probably fast become a popular route for cyclists from all around the world. Until that happens, the Pacific Rim Highway is to be recommended only with a disclaimer. There are very few roads that are more thrilling to ride, but the risks are real. Speed can change from crawling at 6 kilometers an hour to 60 kilometers an hour in a matter of seconds. The road is rough and there are many curves with limited visibility. Death could be just around the corner, as there is no shortage of bad drivers in Canada. Once I was past the most challenging parts of Highway 4, the ride was truly a dream come true. Traffic was light and I really got to enjoy Vancouver Island at its best. It would have been nice to find a rest area at some point, but I managed to fill all my needs along the roadside and even enjoyed a snack sitting on a guardrail somewhere.
I had 2 sandwiches, some water, and you know, I'm feeling a bit refreshed, but I can feel the fatigue. The thing is, with the mountains like I had today and a road in this condition where I really have to work hard to get myself out of those corners, where I could get hit by a car that's coming around too fast or something. You know, that takes a toll on you. There are days when I can go for probably 200 kilometers or something, but a day like today, 100 kilometers is a lot. And you know, since yesterday, since I assembled my bike, I have ridden 100 kilometers already. I could fall asleep right now.
The ride had some fantastic descents, and since I had a speedometer, I can say that my maximum speed was around 65 kilometers an hour. After one particularly long, fast stretch of road, I decided to stop when I heard someone cheering on a crowd via a megaphone. The road was up on the embankment of the Taylor River. A bunch of people were down there. I had no clue what they were doing, but it looked like a good time. A group of young girls who were standing apart from the rest on an island in the river lifted up their tops to flash their breasts to me, cheering loudly. Hey, I'm a guy, and it did make me smile.
Crazy.
But I wasn't done riding, so I went on. After several more kilometers, I got to a store that also housed the visitors' information. I parked the bike outside and went in to buy some ice cream. This was Sproat Lake, a popular recreational destination. As it turned out, there was a provincial park nearby. I was tired enough to check for available campsites, hoping it wouldn't cost as much as in Tofino. I was able to find a spot right by the water for $25. It was still relatively early in the day, but I was tired enough to take it easy. Again, I had sandwiches for supper as I didn't have any fuel for my stove yet. I was in my tent, ready to pass out even before it got completely dark. The ride had taken a lot out of me that day, and the plan was to ride even more the following day. I was planning to get back to Nanaimo. I had no idea where I'd be staying, but it would be time to look for a free campsite. I was getting better at pitching my new tent, and it would be fine at the right spot. However, that night I was grateful to have shower facilities. It felt great to go to sleep clean. The next morning I left Sproat Lake, not nearly as early as I had started the previous day. It wasn't because I had slept in, but because I took a walk along the lake to get a glimpse of some petroglyphs that natives had carved into a rock centuries ago. The symbols were barely visible unless you knew where to look. A big board with an old photograph helped with that. Erosion had already erased much of the carvings. Like a fish there. There's supposed to be 9 in all. These petroglyphs erode. They start to disappear. It's a kind of a shame, but there's really not much that could be done about it. My legs felt sore, but not that bad. Breakfast was still more sandwiches with the cheese and salami I had bought in Tofino after getting off the bus. I washed it all down with water as I hadn't yet bought any fuel for my stove yet and couldn't make coffee. Port Alberni wasn't far, so I would get some methyl hydrate on my way through. The ride into town was relatively easy. I stopped at the 7-Eleven for a hot dog and a cup of coffee before hitting the local Buy Low Foods and Canadian Tire. The grocery store had everything I needed in terms of food. I bought more than I was comfortable loading on my bike. There went another $30, but it was the only way to keep feeding myself along the way whenever hunger would hit. I mostly picked non-perishable foods, except for more coleslaw and some fruit. I had 3 bananas right in front of the store. They tasted awesome. I had probably lost a lot of minerals due to sweating in the heat, which was still on the rise and pretty early in the season. At Canadian Tire, I bought a safety vest and decided to wear it whenever I was sharing the road with cars. I knew that visibility was one of the few things I could control out on the road besides my own conduct. I was disappointed when they didn't have any methyl hydrate for my stove. They were all out, I was told. This meant that I still had no way to cook my own food, even though I was hauling all the gear. I even had a jar of instant coffee. Lots of useless weight for now. Just after loading my bike with all the food, I had a long hill to climb east of Port Alberni. Someone outside the grocery store had mentioned
the Hump,
which is the nickname locals gave this steady incline that was 5 kilometers long. It was only day 2, and I was already relying heavily on my 34 cog granny gear. The second day on a tour across mountains tends to be one of the toughest. The initial burst of energy you start off with is gone, while the body has not yet fully adapted to the demands of touring. So climbing this hump was a long and slow process. The nice thing about climbing long hills with a loaded bicycle is that a descent will usually follow. By the time I had reached the peak, I was drenched in sweat and my legs were hurting. But this descent more than made up for the hard work. I reached 65 kilometers an hour again, and for longer than ever before. The road had a narrow but smooth and clearly marked shoulder, so it felt relatively safe, even though vehicles were passing. The fun lasted just a few minutes, but took me into Macmillan National Park, an ancient forest where I stopped for a while to have a snack and take a hike. There were many other tourists, and I had to make my way through the parking lot that was full of vehicles to get to the trailhead, where I simply leaned my bike against the wooden fence. Some of the trees were 800 years old and huge. This forest does not look like anything we're used to these days. For a period of half an hour or so, I was transferred back into a time before Europeans had decided that forests are best chopped down and used for paper or building materials. It was a great experience, but also a grim reminder that the forest we know in Canada today is nothing but a shadow of what it once was. The sad part is that virtually no one alive today even realizes the true price we are paying for our lifestyles in 3,000 square foot homes that are situated in park settings. Forests in Canada were chopped down and replanted over and over for centuries. A real forest takes that long to develop. We don't have many left today. The ride continued on Highway 4, first along Cameron Lake, which is stunningly beautiful. Eventually, the highway became a 4-lane expressway. There was a very wide shoulder for me to ride on, but it was far less enjoyable than the narrow 2-lane I had started out on. There really is no better way to destroy a natural environment than to build an expressway through it. Even if all the cars had zero emissions, there would still be the constant noise of their passing. If you can't get away from them on a ride across Vancouver Island, where else in Canada can you ride your bike without having to worry about automobiles? I was determined to find the Great Trail, the trail that supposedly connects Canada from coast to coast to coast. What is a Trans-Canada Trail good for if you can't find it? When you look at the map of the Trans-Canada Trail on Vancouver Island, you can't find Tofino, and you will have a hard time finding Port Alberni or Nanaimo. There are no roads marked on this map, so how could you possibly expect to find this great trail if you're coming off a highway? One thing is clear, the trail doesn't go anywhere near Tofino or the west side of Vancouver Island. I was going to have to use the highway until I had a chance to figure out if and where I could connect to the Great Trail, which wasn't anywhere near me on this day.
Well, I'm overdue for a late lunch, and the sign here says Rathmore Beach, and it's supposed to have picnic tables there, so I'm going to try it out. Hopefully it's not another 10 kilometers off the exit. Crazy traffic here, but you know, at least I have a shoulder to ride on.
I stopped for lunch in Parksville at the visitor center. Once again, sandwiches were on the menu. I had a picnic table to myself from where I was able to watch people who were pulling in with their cars, mostly to use the bathroom. Here's a clip I recorded during that break.
This is Parksville. I'm gonna have lunch here, and well, so far so good. I did about 65, 68 kilometers so far today, and I got goodies. I got cheese, salami, salad, everything you need for a good sandwich. And instead of buying bread, I bought these buns because they don't get squished quite as bad. I got cheese too on this thing. This is gonna be a high-calorie sandwich. But I have, I believe, less than 40 kilometers to Nanaimo, somewhere in the range of 35, I would guess. And it's highway. Yeah, actually, this is what I was gonna say. The visitor center here set me up with some maps. Probably now I won't really need them, but there's a map of Nanaimo, so I can find my way around later on tonight. Oh, look at this. Kind of neat. Yeah, whoever carved this had a lot of work to do.
The ride continued on an expressway which felt relatively safe, but wasn't very scenic or even pleasant. It made me wonder what to expect on the mainland, which was where I was headed the next day. When I reached the outskirts of Nanaimo, I immediately spotted a good stealth camping place, just off the highway. Even in broad daylight, it probably would have been fine to set up camp, but I decided to wait until dusk. In the meantime, I went to the mall across the highway. There was a McDonald's inside Walmart. Great for using the Wi-Fi and checking emails too. I pretty much spent the evening at McDonald's, stuffing myself with cheap food while chatting with Barbara on Facebook Messenger. When it got dark outside, I simply went over to my pre-selected camping spot, pitched a tent, and went to sleep. Pretty sure that no one was going to bother me until morning. This was my first time stealth camping in quite some time. It was somewhere on the outskirts of Nanaimo, just off the highway. The noise did not keep me awake. I had to recuperate from 2 days of cycling. On the agenda for the following day was another ferry ride back to the mainland. I was planning to take the same ferry that had brought me to the island because it landed in Tsawwassen, from where I could take a trail for a while. In my next episode, I'll tell you about the dike, as locals call it, and another stealth camping adventure. I hope you'll join me, and I'll see you then. And if you haven't subscribed to my channel yet, I kindly ask you to consider that, because it helps me a great deal and it helps you find me, I think.